I was wondering what your sweet spot is and what kinds of businesses you like to invest.
We invest in companies that are building large networks of engaged users on the internet.
Brilliant. Thank you. And what percentage of women startups do you get pitches for, and what percentage have you funded?
When you say women startups, do you mean where there's a woman on the founding team, or do you mean?
Sure. Yeah.
I'd say probably 20 to 25% of the companies that pitch us have a woman on the founding team.
Great. That's really good news. And what about the ones that you've funded?
Well, it probably depends on what vintage you're talking about, whether you
Okay.
go all the way back to, I don't know. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, so, but I think if you look at it over the past year,
Yeah.
maybe it's about the same. Maybe about 20% of the companies that we fund have a woman on the founding team.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Have you noted any differences with women entrepreneurs in how they pitch and build businesses?
Well, I think as operators, there are definitely some differences. I think that women, I mean, it's a generalization, so it's a little bit unfair, but I think that women typically end up being probably better managers,
Okay.
and maybe a little bit less risk takers.
Okay. And just the very fact that you had to think about that makes it probably not such a big issue for you that you've noted in the past, I gather.
We don't have a bias about it one way or the other.
It's really good.
I think that just observing the situations that I'm aware of, that would be there's a little bit, I'd say, just stylistically, I think that there are some differences between men and women in that regard.
Sure. I know that you do a bit of work in Europe. Good for you. And I wondered if you could tell me what differences that you've observed there with respect to the US as regards female entrepreneurs raising venture.
I don't have a lot of experience with female entrepreneurs in Europe.
Okay.
Of the companies that we've funded in Europe, I do not believe that any of them have women on the founding team.
Okay.
But I also don't think that we have enough of a sample size in Europe yet to be, I don't know that you can make any conclusions from that. We haven't looked at that many opportunities in Europe.
Okay.
And so I'm hesitant to suggest that means anything.
Yes, I get your drift. Thank you. Cindy Gallup of If We Ran the World says, I think not as many women as men actively seek VC money because they're not as tapped into the boys' network as male entrepreneurs are. Young male entrepreneurs can very easily become the flavour of the month and get introduced around from one VC to another, get the perception going that they're hot and get their funding. It doesn't happen for women that way. Do you think, Fred, that networking with venture capitalists is harder for women entrepreneurs, and have you noticed any differences, particularly in Europe, I guess?
I have a hard time talking about the European situation.
Okay.
Because I'm not as plugged into what the venture capital community looks like in Europe. I mean, obviously I know who some of the investors are, but it's not a world that we have a tremendous amount of experience in. So
okay.
That's a tough thing for me to assess. I do think that the whole assertion that it's harder for women to network with investors than men is false.
Great. Okay. That's a really good sign. I know that you do attend a lot of events in London and Europe, so I just wondered if you noted if there's women in those audiences or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really good. What would you see then as obstacles for inclusion of women entrepreneurs and achieving funding in Europe? I know probably you're your experience is more in New York, right?
Well, no, I mean we invest throughout the United States and in
Okay.
Eastern Europe. Um, I Obstacles. I think it's largely a question of whether or not women believe that they can be successful, and
Okay.
I think it's just a question of changing people's perspectives on that. I think if women felt that they could be successful entrepreneurs, you would see more women do it.
Great. So we just need to get out of our own way. That's brilliant.
Well,
I
I don't mean it in a negative way.
no, I can hear that.
That I think that there aren't as many role models out there,
Yep.
and so when if you think about sort of the popular culture, whether it's in movies or TV shows or books
Yes.
or magazines or reading on the web, I think that there's the role model of the entrepreneur is most often played by a man, and
Yes.
I think that as a result, there is a little bit of a perception that it's a man thing. I don't think that's true, and so
Yes.
if we just had more role models and we saw more women being portrayed as entrepreneurs, I think a lot of this would shift very quickly.
And definitely last year there was a big pivot year with so many conversations about this issue. So hopefully we're actually in the flux of that change. I read a Telegraph article recently, "Women in Tech are flaky and hopeless," says leading women's advocate, from which I quote, "The problem with female entrepreneurs is that if you don't get a financial commitment from them, they don't show up or they cancel at the last minute. Obviously, this is a UK publication and speaks loudly about the underlying negativity about women in tech that prevails in that culture more than the US. Fred, how do you feel about this gross generalisation of female entrepreneurs, and what has been your experience with women sourcing venture?"
That doesn't sound right to me at all. I think that there's
Right.
absolutely no evidence in the world that I live in that, I mean, the notion of them as flaky, that's ridiculous. I never
Dreadful.
that, never seen it, never
Yep.
never thought about it.
Yep. It's obviously one person's negative view of that interview, I'd say. Often advice for sourcing venture is equated with dating. My background is in the online dating industry, so I'm just interested in this, implying that there's a matching that needs to happen with entrepreneur and investor. Have you noticed a general psychological profile of venture capitalists and also of entrepreneurs that promotes the attraction and synergy between them to develop a great startup?
I definitely think that it's very important for entrepreneurs to do their homework on investors
Okay.
in advance of pitching them and try to identify investors who will be receptive to their pitches.
Right.
In that regard, I think that is a matchmaking kind of opportunity. I think the entrepreneurs need to do that, though. I don't think there's a lot of good intermediaries to do that for
Yes.
them.
Yes.
There's some, but I think for the most part, they've got to do their homework. They've got to figure out who are the most likely investors in their company and then do their research on them and try to identify the individuals and do a lot of pre-qualification before going
Brilliant.
pitching.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really great pragmatic advice. In the dance with an entrepreneur, both in the decision-making process of funding a startup and then in working with those startups, what are the necessary qualities that makes a good venture capitalist? And some of the talents that have been fed back to me via venture capitalists are, would you trust your gut instincts and feelings that happen within the relationship with the entrepreneur as signs about what's happening in the business or the startup? Or would you manage by influence or persuasion?
I think about it a little differently. I mean,
Yes.
my feeling about what entrepreneurs need to find in investors, they need to find people who are as excited and enthusiastic about their business as they are.
Right.
People who believe in the opportunity and are excited about the possibilities and are committed to the success of the venture.
Brilliant.
you don't want someone who's cynical and negative. You want someone who's positive.
Yes, fantastic. That's really great. Look, thank you again, Fred, for your time. I know it's very precious and you're very busy.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye.